Everybody knows about the story of Gideon. It's one of those stories, if you're helping in children's church, that you want, because there's lots of bits in it. But I'm just going to do a little bit of a side step. So as you can see, I've been on holiday again, and I found myself having a new experience this holiday. Rachel, hi Rach, by the way, with the baby. Awesome, hi, welcome, yeah, a round of applause. Because paddle boards are quite the thing, aren't they? I kind of got used to the bodyboard. I'm quite good on the bodyboard. I quite like my wetsuit, but paddleboard's whole new level. And I was interested. We went with the whole family, and we had 3 paddleboards between us. However, we were at the sea, and we spent much of the time on beaches that had quite rough surf. Anyway, everybody else went out, including Don, and my turn came. But I was a little bit wary of this. Even though I love swimming, I love the sea. I wasn't scared of going to the sea, but I was a bit nervous of this. Anyway, I made excuses. Oh, it's someone else's turn. Or, well, tomorrow. Or, oh, it's too late now. But eventually, I was persuaded by my son. Now, my younger son is 36. He's quite, I think you would say, hench, is that the word? He's quite a big chap. So he said, come on, Mum, you've got to come out. And I thought, do you know what? Why not? So we get on the board. The trouble was, as we headed out, it was the wildest day at Polzeath I have ever seen. And the waves were absolutely throwing themselves in. And this big wave came towards us, and I went, Luke, like he said, Mum, it'll be fine. And the board wobbled, but we were over it. And we were off, and another one, and we were off. And we were out in the, and it was clear, and it was calm, and it was wonderful. Which bit of that experience do you think I enjoyed most? It was not the clear, calm bit out on the ocean. It was going through that huge wave when I thought I was going to fall off. I did it. Why did I do it? Because Luke was with me. Now, I'm not saying Luke's like God, but I had someone with me. And actually, you know what? I wanted to live, to do it. We don't want to get old and boring, so why not? Now, just have that story in the back of your mind as we think about Gideon. Gideon, you'll know, a little bit of a history lesson, context lesson. Gideon, I'm sure you know, is found in the book of Judges. We all know the story. It only takes, I think, 3 chapters, chapters 6, 7, and 8 of Judges. Ruth, who we were hearing about last week, is also in the period of Judges, but it's when there was a little bit more peacetime between Israel and the Midianites particularly. So we're in Judges. Can you think of some of the famous judges? Samson. Let's see how we're doing. Let me just see. Deborah, very good. Othniel, very good. Oh, woo, woo. Very good, Othniel. Right, what about Jephthah, which is a nightmare to spell, Jephthah? I bet you hadn't heard of Elon. No. And what about Smeagol? Now, Smeagol, I think he sounds like a character out of Lord of the Rings, don't you? Smeagol. But he's got 1 verse only. But he made it in, but with 1 verse, and this is the verse. It says, he was the son of Anath. He struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, though he too saved Israel. And that's the clue. He too saved Israel. And that was the role pretty much of the judges. Because if you think about it, the children of Israel, they'd come out of Egypt, they had been they'd been in this wilderness experience, and then they go into the promised land, and they thought everything would be fine, but it really wasn't. I don't know if you've ever tried to organize an awful lot of people. It's very difficult. I remember once being put in charge of organizing a walk for 800 teenager boys. That was tricky. We all survived, but you can imagine that the Israelites were a posse. They really were. And getting them on the same page was pretty difficult. And in the end, of course, as you know, God kind of gave up with the judges and we had the kings. But there were these 12 judges in their interim. They didn't really do terribly well. They didn't. It's not sort of their fault. Some of them were better than others. But the pressure from without was much greater than their own capabilities, I suppose. This tricky period for the Israelites was because they were trying to superimpose their faith and their culture in an alien environment. And what they had thought would be the case really wasn't the case. And their identity as God's people was constantly being challenged by the people around them. We are just the same. As God's people, we are constantly challenged by the environment around us, and we fail because of it. So this story has a lot to say to us, and I want to just take you on a little English lesson briefly through a Shakespeare play. Cam will love this. Any other English? Yep, English A-level graduate. I thought Izzy might be into this. Anyway, a Shakespeare play is in 5 acts. Okay, and there's always a hero, and there's always a kind of a basic structure to a Shakespeare play. And when I was reading through chapters 6, 7, and 8, I thought, you know what, this has actually got the structure of a Shakespeare play. So, thank you, Cam, for that encouraging nod. So, here's the background before we read the story, because I really want to spend most of this morning talking about one verse that has meant a great deal to me personally. So, Act 1 sets out the place, the problem, and the setting, and they're explained. The Israelites, we're told, did evil. They're given into the hand of the Midianites. The Midianites were vile. They were oppressive. The Israelites, therefore, had to hide. They hid in clefts in the rock. They hid in caves. And we're told that the Midianites actually invaded their land to ravage it. They killed their livestock and ruined their crops. It was devastating, it was demoralizing, it was constant. Every time they planted, the crops gone, and so forth. The tragedy of this is, it was their own fault. Chapter 6, verse 1 starts off, again, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. That little word, again. Don't you despair of your own sin. Oh, I did it again. I thought I'd learned again. So they were a disobedient people, hiding in caves. So are we. We are a disobedient people, and we therefore hide. We hide from God and we hide from each other a lot of the time. Act 2, the plot is set in motion. We're introduced to the central character, Gideon. He's the hero. He steps onto the stage, and an angel appears to him. He's a little bit surprised. And he is told to go and save Israel. He was not expecting this. He needs an awful lot of convincing. But eventually, after a couple of tests, you know the story with the fleece and all of that, he very, very reluctantly agrees. Just like me. When I do something I know I should do, I'm generally a reluctant hero. Aren't you? Oh, all right then, I'll do it. Like me going in the sea. Act 3 is the climax, the pinnacle, the best bit of the story, if you like. I love this. You've got a stripped back army, 32,000 down to 300, stripped right back, goes to attack the Midian camp. I'd love to do this. Could we do a film, a sort of Latimer Church film, or, of this? It would be absolutely awesome. And in a dramatic attack, the Midianites, it says, ran crying as they fled. This is this horrible lot, this devastating mob who ravage and rampage. They ran crying. Hilarious. I love it. So Gideon's army, against all the odds, he triumphs. occasionally so do we. Oh, cool, did I do that? Wow, amazing. Unfortunately, Shakespeare plays, particularly the tragedies, always have a denouement. The denouement is the working out, everything that's the peak of Act 3, and in the denouement, things start to go badly wrong again. You can't believe it. Unfortunately, it's not the end of the story. It doesn't end with triumph and victory. And Gideon starts messing up fairly quickly and very seriously. He shows what Shakespeare would call, and well, he didn't, we do, his fatal flaw. All heroes in Shakespeare have a fatal flaw. His fatal flaw is revealed, and he decides he will mobilize some troops against some other enemies. He wasn't asked to do it, it was his idea, and it wasn't a very good one. Interestingly, too, if you read the story, and I hope you will afterwards, there is no more mention of the role of the Lord. No more. It's just Gideon. Oh dear. And so, not surprisingly, by the time we get to Act 5, it's back to the start, back where we started. After 40 years of peace, he manages to keep things stable. He dies, and the Israelites, it says, again prostituted themselves. What a waste. What an absolute waste. Just take a minute to think back over the times when you've known victory in your life and you've thought, I will be different. I will change. And you do for a while, and then it's wasted. You'll probably be pleased to know we're now going to read the story. Well, not all of it. I found it difficult to pick out the little bits that we read, but here they are. I think hopefully they'll come up on the screen. And I will read it to you. Just try and get yourself in the kind of Gideon mindset here. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But, sir, Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have." Interesting. "And save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Here's another but. "But, Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh. I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together." Just flipping over, Judges chapter 7. This is the bit we're going to focus on. My key verse comes in this passage. I want you to see if you can spot it. You didn't highlight it, Ian, did you, or anything? No. Okay, that would be too easy. Okay, spot the verse that pretty much changed a lot of my life. Okay? Now, the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. If you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterwards, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. There's loads of them. Remember, we've got 300. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. "I had a dream," he was saying. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midian camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. I mean, it's ridiculous, silly story. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped God. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, so we've got 100 each, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. It's just crazy. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" And then they did, and so on, and that happens, and they shout, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Which was the verse? It's not perhaps very obvious. So the verse is for the Lord and for Gideon. Really? And I want to tell you 2 brief stories, really. The first is many, many, many years ago when I was admitted to hospital. And I was very worried and very anxious, very uncertain about what was going to happen. And puzzled because I had thought that God had told me something and this seemed not to be working out. And I was very vulnerable and I was lying. In those days, you had wards with lots of beds in them. Back in the day, there's probably about 14, 16 beds in this big ward at Wickham. And I was just sitting there. And a nurse came across to the bed where I was, and she said, "The lady over there said to give you this piece of paper," which she did. I opened it up, and the piece of paper said, "I am for you and not against you, says the Lord." Wasn't that extraordinary? I am for you and not against you, says the Lord. And if you don't know that God is for you, you won't manage long as a Christian. You've got to know that the Lord is for you. But the Lord isn't for us because he wants us to do stuff for him. You know, I think that we have a strange view of God, that there's God and there's us, and God uses us. And we know all this stuff about partnering with God. In fact, we sang quite a lot of words just now about that. But actually, God plus us makes a whole together. And I can do things on my own. I can do quite a lot of things on my own, actually. I can do things for God on my own. I can choose not to do those things. But if you do things with God, it is exactly what we were singing. It's Christ in me. It is one thing. So when this verse came alive to me, I was at Focus. I think it must have been about 14 years ago, perhaps 12 years ago. And none other than R.T. Kendall was speaking. So I tried to find what he'd written because I thought that I could just do his sermon. But unfortunately, I couldn't. So I can only do the verse. But he was talking about Gideon, and he talked about this verse, for the Lord and for Gideon. And I suddenly got it. He said, you can put your own name in there. For the Lord and for Stephanie. For the Lord and for You put your name in for the Lord and for, I'll choose my friend Barbara because she won't mind, for the Lord and for Barbara. He says that for each one of us. He is for us. And when we do things, this is the really important point I want you to get a hold of. When we do things, we don't do them just for him. We do them for ourselves, and that's okay. Because doing things for God that he wants us to do is doing things for ourselves. It's the best of us. It makes us the best version of ourselves when we do those things. It's okay. And as Gideon charges down the hillside, he says, for the Lord and for Gideon, and he finally gets it. I mean, you can see it, what it means to him. And it doesn't come, if you look back at the story, we haven't got time now really to do this, but God has said stuff to him. There are sort of some steps. His thinking changes when God says to him, the Lord is with you, and calls him a mighty warrior, which he certainly wasn't. I don't think he was ever a mighty warrior, actually, because flames and torches and trumpets don't really make you a very good swordsman, does it? So I don't think he was a mighty, but anyway. And then he begins to walk in God's ways. If you read the story, he goes out, he destroys the altar that his father had built, and that's quite brave, isn't it? You don't sort of trash your father's legacy easily. He did that, and he gets himself in a bit of trouble about that, but he starts to actually walk in God's ways. There's a defining moment for him when it says, the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon and he blew a trumpet. And I think that is what makes the difference when the Spirit of the Lord came on him. And if we're going to have keys, if you like, from the life of Gideon, it is the dependence on the Spirit of God to change his whole way of looking at life. Funnily enough, it's after that we have the test with the fleece. It isn't that having the power of the Spirit on him made him super successful all at once. Do you remember that bit with the fleece and all of that? Read it if you don't know what I'm talking about. And then we see that actually courageous leadership depends entirely on God to be really courageous. That some of the crazy things he does, there's the crazy plan, the 32,000, mostly commanders of armies say we're too few. Can we have a few more? But this is exactly the opposite. God's saying you're too many. And of course, it's all to save Gideon's pride, to save him being pride. Because, if you're like me, you do something and it works. And you go, it's good. And you know the story of who stays. But he has that crazy, he does it. He does it extraordinary that he actually does it. And then he goes down and he has, I think it was lovely that God gave him this encouraging kind of insight into a conversation where there's the barley flattening the wheat, the loaf of bread. And it's then that he suddenly realizes that God not only knows him and wants to use him, but he's taken the trouble to tell somebody. And so forth. So, just as we finish, for the Lord and for Gideon, for you, for the Lord and for me, for Stephanie, for the Lord and for you, put your name in. Gideon had never shouted this before. He had been threshing wheat in a cave, hidden. But when the Spirit of the Lord comes on, he breaks out of more than just the cave. He breaks out of his way of living. Oh gosh, we live in caves, We construct caves around ourselves where we can do life. Get out of the cave. What are you doing? Dan said last week about all of us are leaders. And I was thinking about that. And I suppose some people here think, well, I'm not a leader. I'm not a Gideon. Yes, you are. because we all have influence in the kingdom of God. You can live your life in a cave, doing life in your cave if you want, or shaped by the culture and all of that. Or you can get out on the hillside and you can defeat the oppression and so forth. You can. He got it. He breaks out of his past. He breaks out of his hidden life. He breaks out of his self-doubt. He breaks out of his feelings of helplessness. He breaks out of his weakness. And I think, just as the jars smashed as they tore down the hill and the light shone out, that was when Gideon broke out of his cave. His light broke out. And finally, he was who he was supposed to be. He broke out of his threshing floor mentality, where he let circumstances define who he was. What circumstances in your life are defining who you are and how you live your life? And where do they let you make excuses for yourself? It's a challenging word. So our lessons. The Church of God needs people to shout for the Lord and for. I was thinking about this earlier this morning. I want us as a church to shout for the Lord and Latimer Church. We can choose to live in a cave. We can be shaped, or we can say, we will charge as a people down the hillside. However, I come with a word of caution. Don't try to be a hero. There is no place in God's kingdom for a lone Batman. In my day, it would have been the Lone Ranger, I suppose. A James Bond. There is no place for me to shout, for Stephanie. There isn't. And actually, sadly, where the greatest temptation in the kingdom for leaders and leadership is to exchange the divine agenda for your personal ambition. Can I just add in here that sometimes you also exchange your calling for your personal ambition? There are times we compromise. I know that when I did a busy job, sometimes I compromised for what was an all-consuming life of work. Then maybe I let that obscure some of the way I live my life. Not too often and not too much, I hope, but I could see it. And finally, I just want to say this too, because I've seen this in the church, and I think this will resonate with some of you. Spiritual leadership is very different from worldly leadership. Don't try and bring your worldly leadership skills into the church, because they are not required and they won't work. And I know, because I failed dreadfully when I came to this church, having left work and started being on the team here. I would be in a meeting or whatever, and I'd go home and I'd say to Don, oh, and he would say to me, you're not at school now, you know. Don't do it in the world's way. Do it in God's way. I'd like you to close your eyes, and you remember, I'm sure, the old hymn we used to sing, Who is on the Lord's side? Well, I've taken the liberty of adjusting the words a little, and I'm going to read it and bring it to you this morning as a challenge. Are you on the Lord's side? Will you serve the King? Will you be his helper? Other lives to bring? Will you leave the world's side? Will you face the foe? Are you on the Lord's side? For him, will you go? And the refrain, by thy call of mercy, by thy grace, all of grace, by thy grace divine, we are, I am, on the Lord's side. Saviour, I am, we are thine. For me to live is Christ,